But it is probably one of the most favorite and most requested components of that retreat that I do every year. So they really value it. It is intimidating, and that's what they'll tell me every time, especially my new counselors. They are always terrified of this training portion. And then they get done and they say it was the most valuable. They feel super confident. And it's, like I said, it's one of the favorites. But it is overwhelming and intimidating when they see that on the schedule. But then it is one of the most valuable training sessions for them. So this portion is key as far as preparing your admissions staff to have those conversations. All right, so I know that I want to be conscious of allowing questions, so kind of a recap of what we've learned. Financial aid is scary, kind of already knew that, but it is really important for our students, especially those at-risk students. It's very important for them to have those conversations. Admissions and financial aid really need to partner, and it needs to be a collaboration and not that silo. This is what I do, this is what you do. And I have loved that at Rockhurst. It's been amazing, and it really serves the students. I see this make a difference every year for students that didn't think Rockhurst was a possibility. I know that these Rock Talk conversations are the factor, are what helps them realize that it was a possibility for them. And in the end, it's all about right fit. We want to make sure that the student gets to the institution that is the best fit for them. And I really think this is important for admissions offices to offer to help students determine if it is a right fit for them financially, personally, academically. We know financial is one of the most important factors for them. So this should be at the forefront of those conversations that we're having. And I kind of walked you through how we do it. There are other ways to incorporate this. This method works great for us. We've had really good success and good feedback from our families. So I would encourage other institutions to take a look at implementing something like this to really help serve those students. So that's all I got. What questions do you guys have for me about this? I'm going to actually exit my screen. You guys can see me. My lighting is all funky.
I wanted to ask you, during the process of all of the financial aid, you were talking about what you felt like was the most effective thing. Could you talk a little bit more about that and expand on it a little bit?
You mean like the most effective part of the conversation, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Really going over the award and then the estimated cost. So many times students look at their award letter and like, okay, I've been offered, $30,000. This is great. But then they need to go over the estimated cost of each institution. And that's the piece that I think a lot of students miss, is then comparing the award letter to the cost. Because in many cases, it is more affordable than they think. And then in some cases, they didn't properly think about the numbers as far as what that remaining balance would be to then prepare for it. So really and this is where we see the light bulb kind of go for a lot of students is, this is what you've been offered. This is what, your estimated cost is. This is where we're at as far as a surplus or a remaining balance. That is the piece that I think is really crucial in those conversations.
And whenever they have the remaining balance left, like this is how much you need to pay, what's the conversation like at that point?
Yeah. So then for us, we want to open with, have you prepared, or what is your expectation of this remaining balance? So we open with that, and it's very common that the response is, I don't have one. And so then that's very common. Some families, we've got a 529, or some students, I have applied for these scholarships, or they've got a plan, grandparents, or, things like that. But many times it's, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And so then we walk through, of course, what Rockhurst offers. We have payment plans, we have an income share agreement. We're going to walk them through our process first. And then we're going to, look at some other options as far as Parent Plus loans, private loans. Here are different scholarship websites that you should be looking at. Then we're kind of walking them through, these are, if you don't want to take out a loan, here are some options for you as far as these loans, the payment plan, those types of things. So we kind of walk them through those different options, but it then goes back into their court as far as what they're comfortable with.
So We haven't had, you've been very thorough
Yeah.
actually, but we haven't had any questions come in through the chat. But I also wanted to ask you, is there one thing that you really want everybody to take away from this little discussion?
Um, it is a very uncomfortable conversation. And I worked in financial aid and then being in admissions, and I talk to my counselors every year. It is uncomfortable, but once they have had the conversation and the rough conversation in question of how do you plan to pay, every single time I've never had a person, a counselor or a student, regret that conversation. And so, as intimidating and as uncomfortable as it is to just point blank ask a student, what is your plan? Have you thought about this? I've never had a person walk away and regret that question or that conversation to get a student thinking about that. We don't want to rush it. We definitely want to make sure it's timely to the award letters going out and things like that. But once that award letter is there and you can go over it, I think it is an important conversation. We don't want, to put our head in the sand. We really need to confront that head on and have that conversation. Because like I said, at Rockers, we're a private institution. Many students feel they can't afford us. This conversation shows them they can. And that's something that they're avoiding because they're afraid of the answer they don't want. And so that's really important for those students to engage in that conversation as soon as they can.
Are there any questions from our audience? Would anybody like to ask anything? While we're waiting to see if anybody's gonna chat anything. Michaela, would you mind hanging around for just like a couple of minutes because the recording failed at the beginning and I started it in the middle.
Okay.
And so kind of just we'll run back through the slides real quick to make sure we've got them in there. I don't know why it failed, but it did. It failed. It did not record. So, and I caught it in the middle of what you were doing.
I noticed
So,
like all of a sudden the light popped on. So,
yeah,
yeah, no
it
problem.
failed. I don't know why.
No problem.
So I want to make sure that we get you because yours is really, really important conversation to have. I want to make sure we get your at least your slides and maybe just a little bit to make sure that we've got it on there. And we're done a little early, so we have enough time to do that.
Absolutely.
So if no one has any questions, then you're free to go. The next I have a script I'm supposed to read, so but anyway. Thank you, Michaela. And you have a few minutes to, let's see, it's actually 5 minutes to 11. So you have 15 minutes to stretch your legs, grab a refill and a snack, and be sure to join us for the financial aid panel. It's certain to be full of great information. You can access that panel using the conference landing website. Please see the link in the chat. There you go. Which is already up there. All right, thanks. Would you mind running back through that again just to make sure that we have it for the recording?
Yes, yes. Okay, hold on. Let me.
Let's get at least get that first part of the slides. I can't remember where it popped in. It was somewhere in the middle. I realized that the recording had failed. I had a little notice, so I have a split screen, and the notice for it was underneath the WebEx screen,
Oh,
so I didn't see it.
okay. Can you see the PowerPoint?
I can, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so do you want me to just kind of like just restart it? Or?
Just kind of give a little quick summary since we're running through. I mean, you already went through. I don't want you to give your whole thing again. And I caught it halfway through. It's just I wanted to make sure we at least had the front slides.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so this one, I'm Micaela Lenhart, Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Rockhurst University. This session is, but I don't want to talk about financial aid. Okay. So I wanted to open with why we're afraid to talk about financial aid. So this word bubble, these are words that I reached out to my admissions counselors to ask them, what are the things that they think of when they think of financial aid and financial aid conversations? And so you can see here, overwhelming, uncomfortable, intimidating. These are all words that are coming from seasoned professionals. So we know if they're uncomfortable, our students have to be even more uncomfortable because my admissions counselors have been through this year after year. They've been through it as a student. So they should definitely, and they are much more comfortable, but these are still the feelings that they're experiencing. So we know it's really uncomfortable for our students who have not been through that at all. We also know that this is a really important topic. At Rockhurst, we survey our incoming students every year to ask them, kind of where they're at, what is their most important decision in their college search process, so we can meet the students' needs and really address those subjects for them. In fall of 2020, 72.2% of students said that cost and financial aid was the number one factor in their college decision process. And then again in fall 2021, 67% of those students said that was their number one factor. So we know it's the number one reason that they are choosing the institution that they're considering, but we also know it's probably the number one most avoided conversation that they don't want to have. So it's uncomfortable, but it is extremely important because it is how they're making their college decision. And so we know that this is an important conversation. What do we need to do about it? How we approach this at Rockhurst University is we work with admissions, or we work with financial aid, and admissions is the front line for financial aid. So we try to answer as many of the general questions and document collection as possible, and really help financial aid to stay focused on the processing and getting through as much of that documentation as possible. It's a very strong partnership. We really try to foster the collaboration instead of making one office the bad guy. I've worked in financial aid. I've been in that situation where it feels like admissions promises the world, and then I have to be the bad guy to have the difficult conversation. This creates a stronger partnership so those offices don't have that hostility, and we really work together to serve the student rather than those silos as far as who has to cover what information. We do this by sending admissions, sends the emails, phone calls, text messages for the missing documents, things like verification, selective service, that type of stuff. We really reach out and try to work those lists for financial aid to collect that documentation. We do even let the students submit that documentation through our admissions portal. They can just upload it instead of having to mail that back, mail or fax back to the university. They upload it and it makes things easier for the students, and then we send that on to financial aid. Financial aid does still mail that documentation out, but we really try to handle everything electronically. Then financial aid, once they have all the documents, they create the award letter and the cost sheet. When they do that, at Rockhurst, we're very lucky. We have a CRM that's really robust, and we scan those up into the CRM, and then the admissions counselor can have access to that to be able to see that, to go over it with the student. If you don't have a CRM, or you don't have one that has that capability, I would encourage you to look into other options, such as a OneDrive or some type of document sharing so that the admissions staff can have access to that information. Then, once those are sent out, the admissions counselor follows up with the student to go over that, whether that's at an event that I'll talk about in a minute, or that is at an individual conversation on campus, over the phone, virtually. We really just continue to follow up with the student until we've had that conversation, because we feel it's really important to go over everything with them. And then the events that I mentioned, we call these Rock Talks because we're Rockhurst University. And the time frame is typically January through March is when we host these, but it depends on the students. So if we need to host them later, we absolutely do. We have these virtually on campus, and then we actually go to the students. Example, St. Louis is a popular area for us. We go over to St. Louis and we post up shop in a hotel typically. Their conference room, we take over and we meet with the students there. Families book time slots, 20 to 30 minutes, to have individual conversations with our staff to go over everything. In that one-on-one conversation, we go over the award, we go over the cost sheet, and we really have that tough conversation. If it is a tough conversation, saying, this would be your remaining balance, a lot of times it's a very pleasant conversation saying you don't have this remaining balance or you have a surplus. And so we're having those conversations, making sure they walk away with a very clear picture of what costs and finances look like at our institution. We also think it's important to go over the lingo with them, because many times this could be the first time they're hearing the words such as verification or dependency override or things like that. So we do have a document that covers some of the basic lingo, so they can walk away with those terms on paper, so they don't feel like they have to remember it. They have that documented for them to go over at a later time. And then financial aid is available for some of those more tricky situations, such as dependency override, rejected FAFSA, some of those things that are not what I would call frontline. We escalate those to financial aid, and they go over what documentation is needed, what that process looks like. But they're right there with us through every step, whether it's a virtual, on-campus, or off-campus event. They travel with us. They have their own breakout rooms. Financial aid is our partner in this process to make sure We can have that soft handoff saying, okay, this is going to be your financial aid counselor once you get to Rockhurst. This is going to be, the person you'll have these conversations with. It's not such a cold handoff once we get to the institution. They're gradually introduced to that office and feel more comfortable with them rather than that kind of harsh handoff that can happen many times. I think the recording started when I
Yes, this is where it started.
okay.
Thank you so much. I know that that's kind of asking you to go back to what wasn't recorded, but I didn't want anyone to miss it because your talk was really, really good
Feel
and interesting.
thank you. Yeah, no, it wasn't a problem at all. So yeah, no, I'm happy to help.
Well, you're a good sport, and I apologize. The recording failed, and the notification was underneath the WebEx window, so I didn't see it, and then I happened to notice that it wasn't recording. So,
Oh, not a problem. I'm just thankful the audio worked. I also thought my camera had broke right before this. So my camera worked, my audio worked. I can't ask for anything better. Like we're good.
well, thank you. You were really interesting, and I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if you ever need anything, reach out.
All right. Well, I'm going to end our recording now,
Perfect.
and and do all the